Welcome, dear friends. Today's podcast draws its inspiration from the spiritual classic Divine Intimacy, Meditations on the Interior Life for Every Day of the Liturgical Year by Father Gabriel of St. Mary Magdalen, O.C.D. For more Carmelite resources, visit the General Curia of the Teresian Carmel at discalcedcarmelite.com. Now let us begin our journey into Father Gabriel's profound spiritual insights.
Welcome back. For today's deep dive, we're going to be focusing on a really beautiful section from Father Gabriel of St. Mary Magdalene's Divine Intimacy.
Yeah, we're taking a look at Meditations 113 through 118, and those are geared towards the third week of Lent.
And they all kind of revolve around the central theme, which is humility. And, it's such a core virtue, really, for the spiritual life, especially during Lent.
Right, and for our listeners out there who are really trying to deepen their prayer life and understanding of spiritual theology, especially within maybe like the Carmelite tradition.
Right.
These meditations offer so many rich insights, especially in this season of reflection. So I think it'll be a great deep dive to uncover some of those gems.
Yeah. So let's jump right into it. Meditation 113 is titled The Lowest Place. And when I read this, I immediately thought of, John chapter 13, verses 15 and 16, where Jesus is washing the feet of his disciples.
Yeah, that's a really powerful image, and it's such a foundational example for us when we're trying to understand humility. Christ isn't just, giving us an example of service. He's actually commanding us to do the same thing.
Right.
He says, I have given you an example that as I have done to you, so you do also. That's pretty clear. And he even emphasizes that by saying, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. It's that radical reorientation, right? It's not about prominence. It's about humility in all our actions.
And it's interesting because, I think it's one thing to acknowledge that we're dependent on God, to say, oh yeah, I'm a servant of the Lord.
Yeah.
But then to extend that same humility to our interactions with each other.
Right.
To be willing to take, that less esteemed position. That's where it really gets challenging.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's easy to say it. But when we're actually in those situations where our ego might be bruised a little bit, it's hard. Father Gabriel, he really drives that point home. It's about being genuinely content with being treated as someone who serves without needing that recognition or needing that special treatment. And when we think about it, Christ, being divine, he took on the role of a servant. He even, went so far as to accept, the treatment of a criminal. And that's a powerful image of humility.
Right. It also makes me think of Luke chapter 14, verse 10. Jesus says, when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher.
Right.
But, it's not about trying to strategically position ourselves for an ego boost, right?
Yeah.
It's about genuinely desiring that lower place.
Right.
And if we do move up, it should only be through God's will, not our own self-promotion.
And I think that's where, St. Therese of the Child Jesus has a really beautiful perspective on this. She says, the only thing for which you will not be envied is the lowest place. Therefore, the lowest place is the only one where there is no vanity and affliction of spirit. Isn't that beautiful? Like, she's recognizing that when we choose humility, we actually free ourselves from those anxieties that come with pride and seeking approval. It's a pathway to peace.
That is so freeing. It's really, really beautiful. And it's fitting, I think, that this meditation ends with a colloquy, which is a personal prayer asking for the grace to really embody this virtue of humility and to let Christ's example guide us.
Right.
So moving on now to Meditation 114, The Hidden Life. This one really struck me, especially in the context of our world today, which is so, focused on external validation.
I know. It's so true. We live in a world of social media and self-promotion, and this meditation invites us to contemplate something completely different, right? To think about the years that Jesus spent in obscurity before his public ministry. For 30 years, he was hidden, and that deliberate hiddenness really speaks to the value of living a life unknown to the world. It's a stark contrast to what we're used to.
It makes me think of that quote from The Imitation of Christ. Love to live unknown and reputed as nothing.
Mm-hmm. That's it, right. And, it reminds me of Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 and 7, where St. Paul says, that Jesus, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men.
And, Jesus himself, he gives us those instructions in Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 18, right?
Mm-hmm.
About giving alms in secret, about praying in secret, about fasting in secret. And it's all about pleasing our Heavenly Father.
Right. It's about that interior disposition. It's not for show, it's for God. And I think, a really great example of this is St. Teresa Margaret of the Heart of Jesus.
Yeah.
She really embraced this devotion to a hidden life, didn't she?
Yeah, she did.
Her whole spiritual program was about reserving her being entirely for God. She really tried to conceal her interior life, her virtues, from human admiration.
Yeah. It's like she understood that principle of to live alone with God alone.
Absolutely. And Father Gabriel, he makes a really important point here. Like a soul that's always seeking praise, that's always craving that external validation, it can't really achieve that deep union with God, right?
Right.
Their attention is divided. It's fixated on the world, on the opinions of others, and that just makes us so vulnerable to vanity, It hinders that purity of intention.
And St. Therese, she actually expressed that desire, that beautiful desire for anonymity, when she said, "Oh, Jesus, grant that no one may think about me, that I be forgotten and trodden underfoot like a little grain of sand."
Wow, what a powerful prayer. It speaks to the freedom that comes with being hidden from the world.
Yeah, it's about finding our joy and our fulfillment in being known and loved by God alone. So the colloquy for this meditation, then, it becomes this plea to cultivate that desire for hiddenness, right? To dedicate everything we do solely to God's glory.
Absolutely. And it takes us even deeper in the next meditation, meditation 115, to be hidden from myself. Now, that's getting profound.
I know, it's so interesting. He talks about spiritual egoism, which, at first glance, it sounds like a bit of a paradox. But when you think about it, we can get so focused on our own spiritual progress, on how we're feeling, on our consolations, even on our dryness.
Right.
That we can actually end up putting ourselves at the center instead of God.
Right. It's like this sneaky little form of self-absorption that disguises itself as piety. We've got to be careful about that.
It is. It's really subtle.
Yeah.
And, I think sometimes God allows us to go through these periods of spiritual dryness or darkness precisely to help us detach from that self-examination, from that constant need to know where we're at on our spiritual journey.
Yeah, to just surrender to his will, right? To trust in his process. St. Teresa Margaret, she really embodied this. She desired to be hidden, not just from others, but even from herself, in a sense.
Yeah, it's amazing. And this leads us to the idea of disinterested service, right? That when we're not focused on our own spiritual gains or rewards, when we let go of that, then we become free to serve God with a pure intention, just for his glory and not for ourselves.
Right. It's like St. Teresa of Avila said, we're serving God gratuitously as great lords serve their king. It's out of love and duty, not personal gain.
Mm-hmm. And, St. John of the Cross, in his spiritual maxims, he said, "More pleasing to God is one good work, however small it be, that is done in secret with no desire that it be known, than 1,000 that are done with the desire that they be known to men." It's powerful, right? And he even suggests that a truly pure soul would serve God even if God himself remained unaware of their efforts.
That's amazing. That's real detachment.
I know. And St. Therese, she has this beautiful quote where she says that, even if it were possible for God not to see her good deeds, she would still desire to please him just for the love of him.
Wow.
There's no expectation of recognition. It's just pure love.
That's beautiful. That's what it means to be hidden from ourselves in our service. And the colloquy for this meditation invites us to really pray for that, to forget about our own self-interest and serve God with that selfless love.
Yeah, and to pray for the grace to be more like these saints, right?
Absolutely.
So meditation 116, to be hidden with Christ and God, takes this whole idea of hiddenness to another level. It's not just about outward actions or even inner self-forgetfulness. It's about participating in the interior life of Jesus.
Right. It's about recognizing that Jesus's hidden life wasn't just about concealing his divinity from the world. Mm-hmm. There was this rich inner life, this constant communion with the Trinity that he was experiencing. His soul, united with the Word, was always in the presence of the Father and the Holy Spirit.
Right.
And so our goal when we imitate Jesus's hidden life is to be hidden with Christ in God.
Yeah.
To enter, through grace, into that same intimacy with the Trinity.
Mm-hmm. St. Teresa Margaret had this deep longing to, in a sense, imitate the hidden interior life of Jesus, of his sacred humanity that was eternally united to the Word. It's a
Right.
profound mystery. And it really illuminates, I think, the two sides of the hidden life. You have that outward self-effacement, that dying to the world and its recognition.
Right.
And then you have that inward orientation towards God, where we're cultivating that deep, intimate relationship with him.
Yes, and St. Paul says it so well in Colossians chapter 3, verse 3. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God.
And I think it's so true that the more we can detach from the opinions of others, even from our own self-preoccupation, the more space we create within ourselves to experience that union with God.
Right. And St. Teresa Margaret, her deepest desire was to be completely enclosed within the heart of Christ, to live that hidden life of love, sacrifice, and communion.
It's so easy to get caught up in the busyness and the distractions of life. But this reminds us that our true growth happens in that interior life, in that hidden place with God.
Right. It's where we're united with Jesus and we become participants in his Trinitarian life, which is the whole point, right?
It is. It's amazing.
Mhm.
And the colloquy for this meditation invites us to pray, to find that refuge in the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and to live hidden in God with him.
Absolutely. And, speaking of being hidden, it's a good transition to meditation 117, True Glory, which challenges our desire for recognition.
I think St. Teresa offers some really good advice here. She warns about the dangers of being attached to our reputation, even in small ways.
Right. She noticed that even a lot of people who are dedicated to a life of piety were still kind of, stuck on earth because they were concerned about what other people thought of them.
Mm-hmm. And that attachment can show up in so many subtle ways, right?
It really can, like being overly sensitive to criticism or always needing to validate ourselves or wanting to be seen as right or getting our own way. We think we're acting for noble reasons, but deep down it's often just pride.
It's so true. And she has this great analogy where she says, attachment to our reputation is a chain which no file can sever. Only God can break it with the aid of prayer and great effort on our part.
That's powerful. And, she points out that it's not about how we feel in moments of prayer. It's about how we react when our pride is hurt, when our honor is challenged.
Right.
Sometimes those little reactions can reveal how much we're still clinging to our ego.
It's so true. And she has another great quote. She says, God, deliver us from people who wish to serve you, yet who are mindful of their own honor.
And it shows that we can't serve God and our ego at the same time.
We can't. And anything we do that's motivated by our ego is going to take away from our service to God. So the colloquy for this meditation is really about praying to desire true glory, which comes from our union with God, and to let go of the need for human praise.
Right. And that leads us to our final meditation for today. Meditation 118, not excusing oneself, which I think is one of the most challenging ones.
It is. It's so easy to make excuses when we mess up, right?
I know. It's human nature, isn't
Yeah.
it? We want to blame external factors, other people, anything to avoid taking responsibility. It's like Adam and Eve in the garden, They did the same thing.
Exactly. And Father Gabriel reminds us that, as long as we're making excuses, we can't really grow spiritually. Because true growth begins with acknowledging our faults.
Right. We have to be honest with ourselves.
And St. Therese, she has this great point. She says that when we commit a fault, we shouldn't blame things like illness or fatigue, but we should recognize our own lack of perfection.
Right. And she makes this really insightful statement. She says, occasions do not make man weak, but they do show what he is.
That's so good. It's easy to make excuses and feel better about ourselves in the moment, but it doesn't help us in the long run.
It doesn't. It keeps us from seeing the truth.
And true spiritual correction, it starts with recognizing our faults, not just in private, but also by accepting correction from others.
Yeah, and even if we're not saying anything out loud, if we're still justifying ourselves internally, we're not really accepting the correction.
Right. And accepting rebukes can be really hard, especially when we feel like they're not fair or they're not delivered in a loving way.
I know, it's so hard. But we have to remember that God is the only one who can judge perfectly. Other people only see the surface.
Right. And if we're always waiting for the perfect correction, delivered in the perfect way, then we'll probably never going to accept it.
Yeah, we'll always find a reason to deflect.
Right. And St. Teresa, she encourages us to be generous in this area, to accept every correction, even if it seems undeserved.
Wow.
And she says, it takes great humility to find oneself unjustly condemned and be silent. And to do this is to imitate the Lord.
That's a high bar, but it's such a beautiful image of humility.
It is. And, she reminds us that in reality, we're never completely without fault.
Right. There's always room for growth.
And the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 26, verse 63 says, Jesus remained silent before his accusers.
It's a powerful reminder that we can imitate Christ in our silence, especially when we're facing injustice.
So the colloquy for this last meditation is really about praying for the light to see our own faults clearly and for the grace to accept correction with humility.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way to end these meditations.
I think so too. As we wrap up our deep dive on Meditations 113 through 118, what really stands out to me is how interconnected all these themes are, right? The willingness to take the lowest place, that creates the space for us to embrace a hidden life,
Right.
both externally and internally. True glory is found in our union with God, not in the praise of the world. And through all of this, we're called to take responsibility for our failings.
Right. It's a beautiful tapestry of humility woven together with these different threads.
Yeah. It's an invitation to really look at ourselves honestly, to see where we need to grow, and to conform our hearts more and more to the humble heart of Jesus. So as you continue your Lenten journey, dear listener, I really encourage you to prayerfully consider how these reflections on humility can become part of your daily life.
Right. How can we practice taking the lowest place? How can we embrace more hidden life? How can we find true glory in God alone? These are great questions to ponder.
They are. And we hope that these meditations have given you a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper spirit of contemplation, and a desire to grow closer to God through the grace of humility.
Absolutely. And we encourage you to continue exploring divine intimacy on your own.
Yes, there's so much richness there. Well, that's all for our deep dive today.
Until next time, may God bless you.
And keep you.
Thank you so much for listening, praying, and being part of this journey. I hope these words have inspired and uplifted you. Until next time, may God bless us and keep us close to his heart. Take care and see you soon.